Hi, I'm Erich Hoyt, research fellow with Whale and Dolphin Conservation and co-chair of the IUCN Marine Mammal Protected Areas Task Force. And I'm happy to present to you today PowerPoint that we've prepared for the task force. I will share my screen now. Okay, so I'd like to introduce you to a hands-on tool that can be used for the spatial habitat protection of the 130 species of marine mammals, as well as the associated biodiversity. And as you know, the 130 species include 90 whales, dolphins, and porpoises, 33 seals, sea lions, and the walrus, as well as sea otters, a species of river otter, dugong, manatees, and polar bear. And the interesting and valuable thing about them is that they are tethered to the surface by their need to breathe air. And this makes them really valuable in terms of being indicators of biodiversity, as well as of the health of the sea and what's below. So this project started with thinking about marine protected areas for whales, dolphins, and porpoises as part of a book that I wrote in 2 editions in 2005 and 2011. And to try to look at all the areas around the world where whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and to some extent other marine mammals were being included in marine protected areas. And this had grown out of an interest over a couple of decades. And really initially, I mean, the first protected area that included marine mammals really only dates from the 1970s. So all this work was really fairly recent. You know, we just wanted to get a handle on whether marine mammals were actually being included in protection efforts. And so came up with this map. The red areas are existing marine protected areas. The blue areas are proposed. The tan areas are ecologically or biologically significant areas as part of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And you know, what we saw was that putting all these together, this is a sort of output from my book, you know, more than 600 areas, but most of them were politically or socioeconomically shaped in the sense that they may have started out with habitat for a particular species or population of marine mammals, but they, once they went through the process of becoming a marine protected area, they were shaved down, you know, into much smaller size and given really a political shape to the eventual boundaries. And if you look at these areas, I mean, a lot of them you can't see because they're really dots along the coastlines, but even the larger areas are in around islands or very close to the coastline. So you're getting this sort of ribbon, narrow ribbon of protection in those areas, but not in the much larger part of the ocean. And so we were seeing that partly through starting to attend Convention on Biological Diversity meetings, the EBSA meetings, that marine mammals were not really being considered very much in these international fora. And the data to support making proposals for them was all over the place. And a lot of it unpublished. And really, we needed some kind of handy tool that we could use to bring to these meetings and also to give to national governments who are doing marine spatial planning and marine protected areas. So in about 2009, 2008, we formed a group called the International Committee on Marine Mammal Protected Areas. And the main goal of that group was to have conferences. And of course, we had one in 2011 in Martinique, and sponsored by the French government. And we and NOAA, and we really learned a lot through that process and started building exchanges between people and working on networks as a big theme of that group. But we wanted more traction in the international committee, international scene, and really we figured we needed a task force through IUCN. That would be one way to possibly achieve this. So we set this up in 2013 after during the Marine Protected Area meetings in Marseille. And really we've focused mainly on this last objective to date, the enhancing the capacity with new conservation tools. And we've built up it was much smaller, of course, when we started, but it's been building up over the previous 6-7 years now. So the main tool that we've developed, that we've really worked on, has been this Important Marine Mammal Areas, IMMAs, and they are a place-based conservation tool that the definition is that IMMAs are discrete portions of habitat important for one or more marine mammal species that have the potential to be delineated and managed for conservation. They're not protected areas, and they're not identified on the basis of management considerations. So the identification of IMMAs is an evidence-driven, purely biocentric process, not political, not socioeconomic, based on the application of scientific criteria and on the best available science. And I'll come back to that definition a few times. So this is our program through GOBI, the Global Ocean Biodiversity Initiative, that was approved in 2016. And when that was approved, which was largely to do these areas in the Southern Hemisphere, to identify IMMAs in all these areas, we also obtained funds to do a pilot project in the Mediterranean. So that was our first effort in late 2016, and then we moved into the GOBI work in the Pacific Islands, and then across the Pacific Ocean. And then last February, we were in Perth with Australian and New Zealand biologists doing the work there. The one different area was the extended Southern Ocean around Antarctica, which was sponsored by the French Biodiversity Agency largely. We have one more workshop to go in the GOBI work, which is off the west coast of Latin America, from Mexico to Chile, which was scheduled actually for last September, but because of COVID has been postponed and will probably be now an online workshop. So each workshop follows this predefined process where we identify candidate IMMAs, CIMMAs, in the workshop on the basis of received proposals from four areas of interest. And after the workshop, the candidate IMMAs would then go to a review panel, independent review panel, to verify that the criteria were applied correctly and that these are all done on the basis of robust scientific information. And then the candidate IMMAs become IMMAs and are made publicly available on our website, which you can see below. So the 3 stages, as I outlined, areas of interest. This happens before the workshop. Anybody could nominate an area of interest. And then stage 2 is in the workshop, when 30 to 50 scientists work on making these into candidate IMMAs and agree upon them based on applying criteria, which I'll go through in a while. And then the stage 3, when they become IMMAs. And here are some visualizations of several regions of the world. So you can see what it looks like at the start of the workshop. This is the Mediterranean, and then this is workshop results with the candidate IMMAs and areas for which there was not enough evidence, so it becomes an area of interest. And then lastly, with the review results, this is what it looks like. And some areas simply stay as candidate IMMAs if all the evidence is not there or all the reviewer suggestions are not addressed. But they can become IMMAs quite easily. The areas of interest will require substantial more research and can't become an IMMA until, or even a candidate IMMA until a future workshop. But we felt they're useful to be kept on the map as areas to highlight that may become IMMAs in the future and may be worth monitoring, doing research, all of that. These are the Pacific Islands, the 3 snapshots give you an idea. And this is the Northeast Indian Ocean and Southeast Asian seas. You can see an idea, get an idea there. So you can see not all these areas that are proposed to the reviewers. I think about 1/3, 1/5 to 1/3 are turned down and either revert to areas of interest or candidate IMMAs after the review. And so we spent a lot of time working on the website and trying to get this e-atlas in place, which you can take a look at here. And we now have 159 IMMAs identified through the regions where we've worked. You can actually see 2 different projections on the e-atlas, so you can see the Antarctic without the bias of, or without the great distortion that you get with a flat map. And when you click on any area, you'll get a summary, the name of that area and a summary of it. And then you can go in further and get maps of the individual IMMA and the size of it and qualifying species and something about the criteria that were used to create it. So these are just some scenes from the various workshops. It's been an extraordinary experience to go into these different areas, and in some cases we'll know some of the researchers, but many of them we won't know, and to make friendships and really long-lasting associations with all of them has been a really rewarding part of this whole process. So the total area of the 159 IMMAs is 15.6 million square kilometers. The largest, 2.8 million square kilometers, is the Prince Edward Islands and Western Oceanic Waters, IMMA, in the extended Southern Ocean, which has habitat for 2 species of fur seals, southern elephant seals, and killer whales. The smallest IMMA we have is the 45 square kilometer Criterion IMMA, which has these breeding caves for the Mediterranean monk seal. And just about half of the IMMAs are less than 10,000 kilometers in size, Only 13% of them are larger than 100,000 kilometers. Now, the number of IMMAs, candidate IMMAs, and areas of interest by region, you can see here, Australia, New Zealand, 31. This is the most recent region where we were working. I might point out the African Atlantic and the European Atlantic are simply monk seal areas that were considered as part of other workshops. We haven't really worked in these areas yet. Now I'll talk a bit about the 8 selection criteria and the identification process. Again, here's the definition on the right-hand side for reference, but you can start to see these different criteria coming up on the left-hand side with various sub-criteria. So we're looking essentially at 8 different criteria if you consider them separately from A to D2. And we had a several-year process, about 2 or 3 years, with more than 1,000 experts going over and giving us feedback on the different criteria, and trying to make this as appropriate and useful for what we were trying to do in terms of identifying habitat. And a starting point for us, of course, was looking at what other tools like the EBSA and the KBA and the biologically important area, the BIA, cetacean or critical cetacean habitat through the CMS treaty, IMMAs, and the Ramsar criteria, and we tried to match up, and really align ourselves, because we were not trying to reinvent the wheel. We just wanted to capture the specifics of marine mammals, and most of them fit into these existing categories, with a couple of additional elements that we wanted to capture. So looking at the first one, species or population vulnerability, I'm going to go through these fairly quickly right now. Excuse me. With brief examples. So here, for the first one, we have qualifying species of dugong around the southern shelf waters and reef edge of Palau, where, in fact, we were able to visit in 2018 and see the dugong there. But you could see that it's a case of having the data to support this criterion in order to fulfill it. So distribution and abundance. So these are areas supporting at least one resident population, containing an important proportion of that species or population that are occupied consistently. And this is the Maui dolphin off the west coast of North Island of New Zealand. And distribution and abundance, areas with underlying qualities that support important concentrations of a species or population. And this is in the Western Antarctic Peninsula with bluefin, humpback, and killer whales, and also the Antarctic fur seal. Key life cycle activities, areas important for a species or population to mate, give birth, or care for young. And here we have the sperm whale in the Mediterranean around the Balearics. Key life cycle activities, feeding areas, of course, and there are many examples of these. One would be the harbor porpoise in the northeast Mediterranean, northern coast actually of the Thracian Sea. Migration areas, migration movements, and here we're talking about the humpback whale along the southeast African coast. Distinctiveness, and this brings in the culture and other aspects of marine mammals that are important, and of course also important genetic and ecologically distinctive characteristics. And a good example of this is the Irrawaddy dolphin in the Northeast Indian Ocean, Southeast Asian seas, in the Balikpapan, Adang, and Apar bays in Indonesia. And then diversity, a very good example are the Maldives with 22 species of cetaceans. And we have different indices that we develop on for each workshop and each region to show, to indicate what would be considered diversity. It's one criterion that changes by the region, because diversity is a kind of a relative matter. So this just shows you how many times specific criteria have been used to create IMMAs. And excuse me. And I think it's important to say that many IMMAs have been identified using several criteria, but you only need one criterion to create an IMMA. These are some of the species that have been used, from humpback whales, the most common, dugong and spinner dolphins, obviously bottlenose dolphins and sperm whales right up there at the top. So this identification process, includes the first part, the pre-workshop part, collection of areas of interest, as I mentioned, as well as developing an inventory of knowledge and preparing data appraisal forms, knowledge assessments of the region. And of course, we draw on Convention on Biological Diversity, EBSAs, as well as the Protected Planet website has all the MPAs for different species, bird life materials. So we'll use a lot of these as areas of interest if we think or we know they have marine mammals. And then during the expert workshop, we review those submissions. We assign writing groups for all the people involved, and we make agreements on the final candidate IMMA list. And we have templates that we draw up during the workshop. And after the workshop, those templates filled out go to the reviewers, and they may request corrections or additional research. So IMMA is a third part of my presentation. IMMAs on their own mean very little unless there's implementation. So, if you make a tool, you really want to show people how it's been used, or how to use it. And fortunately, the need for marine mammal data in an accessible form is really appreciated. And we've seen huge take up in what we've been producing already. Still, there are gaps. So these are some of the conservation and management agencies that may use products of the IMMA process. And you can see them, you can read them down the list. And we've approached all of these, a lot of different agencies, including the IWC, the IMO, the different branches of the IUCN, national governments, Convention on Biological Diversity. We also, my co-chair, Giuseppe Notarbartolo de Sciarra, attends the Convention on Migratory Species as the cetacean counselor. And in 2017, we were able to get a resolution through CMS, which acknowledged the IMMA criteria and the value of it, and requested all those national parties and range states to identify specific areas where the identification of IMMAs could be beneficial. So this was a nice thing to be able to get buy-in for our process at an international level. So some of the follow-up things that have happened already, the EBSAs are including IMMA layers in future revision of the EBSA process, or planning to do this. Marine spatial planning, we can see examples where it's starting, where IMMAs are starting to be, the IMMA layer is starting to be used with proposed MPAs in Vietnam, Bangladesh, and other countries. They've been spurred on using IMMAs that were recently created, for example, at a regional workshop, taking them back, scientists taking them back to their countries and putting them to use right away. Also for MPA network planning, key biodiversity areas, that's a tool that's being used by the IUCN, KBAs, to identify all kinds of land-based and marine-based diversity. And in fact, through our workshop, we've been able to pull out about 30 of these by having a KBA person at all the workshops who is able to look at what thresholds might be available. The KBA process is a threshold-based process. And the US Navy has used IMMAs to indicate where they will avoid testing low-frequency sonar, which is quite interesting. And the IWC, we've had a workshop last year, or the year before, in which they adopted IMMAs to identify ship strike issues and to work with IMO on mitigation. So we have on the eAtlas a searchable database. So we've tried to make this information as accessible as possible, and you can filter the data and you can request spatial layer downloads. And I think we've had close to 100 requests already from individuals as well as governments and agencies for the spatial layer download. Now, rethinking an MPA post-IMMA, you can see the diamond-shaped area is the Pelagos Sanctuary for Mediterranean Marine Mammals, which was created in about the year 2002 as a it was a landmark area with cooperation of Italy, France, and Monaco, about 87,000 square kilometers. But if we had had our IMMA workshop before that declaration, it would have potentially been quite a different area. As you can see, the IMMA extends further west of the diamond-shaped area outside of the Pelagos Sanctuary. And really the ship strike issues with fin whales and sperm whales are occurring outside of the Pelagos Sanctuary in this western area. So really, that should have some level of protection. And in fact, IMMAs and other agencies, governments are now working on creating something that could extend the protection, maybe not extend the MPA, but with provisions to protect these endangered species, in fact, in the Mediterranean from getting hit by ships. Last November, Giuseppe, my co-chair, and I visited Bazaruto Marine Park in Mozambique and spent a couple weeks there with local researchers and Vic Cockcroft from South Africa, who's done a lot of work there for at least 20 years, maybe 30 years, and local biologists who've done amazing work. We found that the IMMA that had just been declared, which you can see on the right-hand side, which is easily 10 or 20 times the size of the park. Yeah, probably about 10 times, let's say, the size of the park. The dugong habitat for the last dugong population in East Africa, the last viable population, about 300 dugong, is located, about 70% of them are outside the park. And there were various threats, bycatch, as well as Sasol, the energy company from South Africa, had permits to explore for gas and oil right in the heart of this habitat. And after our visit and after the IMMA was created, we were very pleased to hear that the IMMA had in fact helped contribute to a situation where Sasol withdrew the permits and gave them back to the government. We don't know, it's in the government's hands now whether this will become a protected area, but we can see the leverage that the IMMA helped to provide in this case. It's also a great area for endangered Indian Ocean humpback dolphins, I should mention as well, and humpback whales are all through this area. So this is just the template for the Bazaruto archipelago. So we'll see whether it becomes a full protected area or what will happen. So just looking at future directions and how this might fit into some of the plans in the Caribbean. IMMAs really give international scientific recognition to contribute to local or national protection efforts. That's how we see this, the value of this. One of the main values. IMMAs with baseline studies can then be used to monitor against threats to cetaceans, ship strike noise, climate change. IMMAs will play a role in the BBNJ process. We're hoping that they will help, that we can get a lot more data on the high seas, perhaps using satellite images to detect whales, eDNA, acoustics, wave gliders, all these kind of tools for getting information out on the high seas, which we really is one of the main problems that we have, that we do not have enough information outside of the national waters. Now, Northern Hemisphere IMMA workshops, that's a big question. We're now, the last IMMA workshop in the Gobi process will be the west coast of Latin America. And then we have no more funding, but we've got several applications in, and we're really hoping to move to the North Atlantic next. And we'll essentially have the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic to do. So that's 5 separate regions, because it would be divided into the European side, the North American side, then the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico separate, and finally the African side of the South Atlantic and the South American side. And we see that monitoring and review of IMMAs is needed regularly and in regions at least every 10 years. And we're just think the big part of our job is going to be selling and implementing the IMMA tool and integrating it into conservation. So I somehow have a duplicate slide here, but I added the element of the Caribbean Sea, as you can see in the 4th element under discussion for 2022, 2025. So really, I think that's going to be the kind of window we're looking at for getting to the Caribbean. So I'm happy to answer any questions and participate in the discussion after. Thank you very much.